right, so this is where I grew up right here. So I'm going to tell you about myself right from the beginning here. So I grew up right here, about 30 miles west of Boston. And that's my family homestead right there. And there I am. There I am as a little kid. Sharp dresser, I know. I've always been a sharp dresser. Was really into reading when I was a kid. So I read a lot of books. These are the books I read: Mystery of the Spiral Bridge, The Tower Treasure, The Secret of the Old Mill. And you might wonder how I ended up in historic preservation, right? With titles like that. Is it any surprise I ended up in historic preservation as a career? Well, I certainly did. And I was the director of local government programs at the Massachusetts Historical Commission from 1997 to 2021. And I worked with local commissions, historic district commissions across the state of Massachusetts for all those years. We have about 450 or so local commissions in Massachusetts, and mostly all volunteers like you guys. So they had lots of questions, lots of things to go over, and I would spend my days answering their questions, putting together whatever materials might be useful for them in their work. Loved my job, loved every minute of it, loved working with all the local commissions. But after 23 years, decided to do something different and left. And now I'm doing historic preservation planning consulting work in and out of Massachusetts. So I get to work in lots of different states now. All right. So for everyone here today, definitely interested in knowing who's here. So I have been watching the chat just to see who's district commissions and who's heritage commissions, things like that. I know some of your cities and towns. I don't know all of them. And so far, I don't see Dover. I said earlier, my father grew up in Dover, so I know Dover quite well. And those are some other questions. If you want to just keep adding to the chat, I'm always interested in hearing how long you've served on the commission, what kinds of outreach your own commission does, and maybe when did you realize that outreach was going to be a necessary activity for your commission to take on? Sometimes there's something very specific that gives you that recognition. So I have some learning objectives for today. And those are: one, recognizing that outreach is an essential part of any historic preservation program. Recognizing that there are different types of outreach. And then recognizing that outreach types must be tailored to the community and to your specific goals. And then finally, recognizing that working with preservation partners like a nonprofit organization is by far the most effective strategy when we're talking about outreach and education engagement. So throughout New England, throughout New Hampshire, we just have such amazing historic districts in our communities. They're really just incredible. I got to visit a few places in New Hampshire last fall and just really enjoyed visiting some new places. I love visiting any new city or town and just really experiencing all the amazing historic districts we have here. But with all those amazing, incredible historic districts, it is easy to forget that things can change. And this might be familiar to some of you, some of your communities. Things like this can happen, where we have lots of resistance to local historic districts being established, or lots of resistance to a local historic district that may have been established a long time ago. So always really important to think about how we do a lot more than just the local. How we don't just focus just on local historic districts or the ordinance aspect of local historic preservation. We're going to definitely talk a lot more about that. All right, I'm going to ask all of you a question. This works better when we're live, but I do want to ask a question, and we can just put some comments into the chat if you'd like. Who do you think was the first historic preservationist ever? see if we come up with, I'm going to read all your, look back at some of the chats here. All right, so you got Bedford, Effingham, oh, Claremont, oh, nice. Kingston, Epsom, and Claremont, okay. All right, well, if anyone wants to put in who they think might be the first historic preservationist, let me know. We got Nantucket, we got the Egyptians. Okay. All right, we got two good guesses here. And I'm going to start off by just saying this is Anne Pamela Cunningham, and she is an amazing person for what she accomplished. She was the founder of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. Basically, when Mount Vernon was threatened with demolition, it was really falling apart, it was going to be torn down. She put together a national campaign to have everyone send in pennies, nickels, and basically raise this huge sum of money to be able to restore Mount Vernon. So it was an incredible accomplishment, and that legacy continues on. It's not the National Park Service that owns Mount Vernon. Even today, it is the Mount Vernon Ladies Association that still runs this building here. So it was an amazing accomplishment for what she did, and she's often regarded as sort of founder of historic preservation. When I was teaching at UMass Amherst and doing some background research on the history of historic preservation, Anne Pamela Cunningham just kept coming up over and over again. Sometimes the first chapter of a book, they would talk about Anne Pamela Cunningham. But something didn't quite seem right to me when I would read this, because I worked at the Massachusetts Historical Commission for over 20 years. And not once in those 20 years did I ever give this advice. Hey, you know what you should do to save that building? You should buy that historic property. You should raise funds for its restoration, and then you should open the building as a museum. Not once in 20 years did I ever suggest anyone should do that. And so that made me think, okay, well, who really was the first historic preservationist then? Because what I would really offer for strategies when I would be talking to people would be things like this. I'd say, how about we think about community-wide historic preservation planning? How about we think about community education about historic resources? How about we think about adaptive reuse of historic resources? Maybe passing local preservation ordinances. I mean, those are the things that I would talk about every day in terms of local preservation programs, not creating new museums. Okay, so then who was the first historic preservationist? Could it have been someone thousands of years ago? I like to think that it was. And I was watching this documentary a few years ago about cave paintings. And they had uncovered this cave in Europe, and this whole documentary was basically saying how amazing this cave was. And the archaeologist that they were interviewing was basically explaining what was amazing about this cave is that you see the whole evolution of cave drawing as you go deeper into the cave. And what she meant by that was when you first walk into the cave, there's these simple, really simple handprints on the walls. Then you go a little further into the cave, and the scenes get a little bit more complex. There's actually stick figures. Go further into the cave, and now there's actions taking place. There's hunting scenes taking place. There's people running. There's pictures. There's paintings of animals. It's just far more complex. And so what she was saying basically was, yeah, these far more complex cave paintings were painted on the walls thousands of years after the hand paintings were done. Thousands of years later, a different group came in and did their own cave paintings deeper into the cave. So that was amazing. But what was really amazing to me was why didn't those groups that entered the cave in later periods paint over, destroy, or alter the earlier drawings. So what I was really wondering was, how did they save these cave paintings through the millennia without a historic preservation ordinance in place? I'd like to think that there was some education going on. I'd like to imagine that they had things like historic cave painting walking tours going on. And maybe this actually was really just the elders of the groups coming in saying, don't touch those paintings on those walls. Those were created by our ancestors. Leave those there. We're going to go further into the cave. Maybe that's what it was. But whatever happened, nobody touched those earlier cave paintings. They were saved by simply a matter of some sort of public education, some sort of appreciation that had taken place by all the later groups that came in. So here's my historic preservationist counterintuitive reality. You can do historic preservation with only non-regulatory tools. You could do only outreach and have a really good preservation program. You can do historic preservation with regulatory and non-regulatory tools, having like an ordinance and also doing outreach. That's kind of the best position to be in, is be able to have both of those at the same time. You can't do historic preservation with only regulatory tools. Just trying to do historic preservation with an ordinance only, kind of doomed to failure. And yet I work with so many communities that really think once we get that ordinance in place, we are going to be all set in saving our local historic buildings. Not the case at all. Here's a lot of the communities that I've worked with over the years. They have one program activity: regulating buildings, doing design review through local ordinance. All their time and energy goes to that one program activity. And so it's no surprise when there's a lot of resistance to that local historic district over time. What I really would like to see, and this is maybe more something to aspire to, is a preservation program, a local preservation program that looks more like this. Design review is way down here, and then you get designation, historic property survey, historic preservation planning. And the biggest thing that you spend your time on is actually outreach and engagement. And so that's going to be true whether you're a heritage commission or a district commission, that your biggest piece of time and energy is actually outreach and engagement. Now, you might be shaking your head a little bit saying, well, we wish we could do that. And this may be something to aspire to. It's not always realistic to be able to have a graph that looks like this for your commission. I understand. But yeah, something to aspire to. So the three things I would like to cover today would be, there's some different types of outreach that we should distinguish. There's some historic preservation outreach, some things to remember, and then planning and implementing preservation outreach. So I like to recognize that in terms of outreach and engagement, there really are different kinds that are out there. First one would be education and appreciation. We'll talk more about this in a little bit. But here's all the things that really are just the things that, whether you're a district commission, a heritage commission, anyone, you're working on all these kinds of things that you're slowly and deliberately increasing recognition in the community that this is a special place. So yeah, all those things, walking tours, plaque programs, preservation awards, house tours, all those things, just build that all up through education and appreciation. Another type of outreach is advocacy. And this is when something's more imminently threatened. There's something really threatened with demolition in 2 weeks. It could be gone. And that mobilizes a lot of people. So it's a very different type of outreach because people are recognizing that there's something imminently threatened. We've got to act now. And there's a different way of thinking about advocacy because there's usually a much broader group that may be concerned about the loss of a particular resource in town. Then there's an outreach just in terms of social and entertainment. So this tends to be more of what the local nonprofit world does. So all the things that are just more fun to do, the wine and cheese parties, the house tours, um, the things that just are feel good kinds of activities, not necessarily things that you can do as a historic district commission. But this is great for outreach as well, to be able to do things that just have no other purpose than just entertainment, just get people just feeling good about their historic resources in their community. This one also is really just for the nonprofit world, the local nonprofit historic preservation advocacy organizations out there. Fundraising, the idea of actually raising funds for maybe rehabilitating, restoring a building, or maybe doing fundraising that actually does a better job with more outreach. Whatever it is, fundraising is always best left to a nonprofit organization and not done by the Heritage Commission or the Historic District Commission. This one, on the other hand, though, is definitely done by the city or town, in most cases, the district commission. So this would be the procedural kind of outreach that would happen to make sure that everyone in the community understands how your local historic district ordinance works. So how your application process works, how your public hearing process works, how you actually decide what kinds of projects are approved in the district or not approved, all those kinds of things. So lots of different aspects to outreach here, often overlooked by district commissions, but really an essential aspect to really have good public relations is thinking about procedural type of outreach. And the last one, I think, is just planning, another kind of outreach. And this is if you're doing something like a preservation plan. Great opportunity to really go out and talk to all of your preservation partners, all the stakeholders in your community, the chance to hold lots of public meetings to gauge the public interest, what their concerns are, what they would like, how they envision their community, the chance to actually go to meetings themselves, to not just hold meetings, but actually go to neighborhood meetings that are already underway, that you're on the agenda to a group of people. Lots of outreach that you can do when you are putting together a preservation plan. Your preservation plan, of course, is going to be much better if you have a good outreach process in place. But this is also just long term, just in terms of just the outreach that you can get in terms of engaging with all of the stakeholders in your community will last long after your preservation plan is actually completed. All right, now I'd just like to go in and talk a little bit about some things to remember when we talk about outreach. And I'm going to go through 1 through 10 of these right here. So first one is just encouraging interest in historic preservation. And I'm going to do this part of the presentation with lots of quotes that I've heard over the years. So you'll see lots of things in quotes, and these are all things that have been said to me over the years. So first one is, we can't do historic preservation in our town. We don't have any regulations, no ordinance, teeth. Well, we need our teeth. That, I would say, wrong. Encouraging interest in historic preservation is effective and essential. And so whether you do things like historic plaque programs like this, whether your National Register districts have historic district signage like this, whether you have an awards program like this, events like this, using Preservation Month activities. So May is Preservation Month, and it's a great time to think about really putting together a whole agenda for what you're going to accomplish. All kinds of things like walking tours, house tours, special access tours. The last one there being the places like Lowell and Worcester that have some tours that aren't that are for buildings that are not typically open to the public. And so he'll have a docent in various buildings throughout the city, and it gives people a chance to see the interiors of these buildings that are typically closed to the public. Old house fairs, expos, things like that are great. Maybe something like a homeowner handbook, the kind of booklet that just goes out to all the homeowners in the community, that talks about the history of their neighborhood, that talks about the architectural styles. It has lots of historic photos, maybe some guidance on how to best properly maintain and take care of their buildings. Those are really useful. Certainly social media, great opportunities with social media to really do lots in terms of encouraging interest in historic preservation. I love the idea that some towns have put together is a workshop for realtors. So this is wonderful opportunity to bring realtors together for a training workshop on maybe the architectural styles in the district, the history of the area. Maybe it goes over all of the application and certificate process if you are a historic district commission. Same thing for contractors. Some places have put together some workshops just for contractors so that the contractors can come in a morning meeting, understand how all that application process goes, understand what they're going to need to do to get their projects properly permitted in a historic district, all kinds of things like that. These have been, for the cities that have done these, they've been really great public relations pieces for building support in the realtor community and the contractor community. All right, as you heard earlier, I've been in historic preservation planning at the Massachusetts Historical Commission and then now consulting for about 25 years. And who might be surprised by my career, choice of a career in historic preservation? Probably mostly my high school history teachers would be shocked my careers in historic preservation. And that is because I was not a great history student. I was bored out of my mind when it came to history class, actually. There was nothing more boring than reading history out of a textbook. And yet, here I am, 25 years in on historic preservation. And I'll tell you what happened, basically. So there's the house I grew up in. That's my neighborhood. And from my neighborhood, I could walk through my backyard, go through the woods, and I would be staring at this building right here. I was absolutely fascinated by this building. I was fascinated enough by this building that I went on my own as a kid to the Historical Society to go learn what this building was, why it was sitting in my backyard. If we have time at the end, I'm going to tell you what this building is. Otherwise, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. But the main point here is that because this history was right in front of me, because I could see this history, it wasn't in a textbook, that captivated me. That got me interested. And that's really has so much to say about why I picked historic preservation as a career. I didn't want to read about history in a textbook. I wanted to be able to see it right in front of me. And so I think a lot about kids in terms of that, about what makes kids interested and excited about learning. And it's a lot of what is right in front of them when they're doing it. What do they see in their own community? What do they walk by every day? So I have a one-pager handout of all kinds of different ideas for historic preservation, outreach and community engagement. I think there's probably some way that we can get this to you later. It's just lots of ideas. I could keep going with those, but I think I'd rather switch on to some other ways to talk about outreach and engagement instead. So we'll get that one pager to you somehow. Okay, so grassroots advocacy, another tool here. The people in the city don't care about history. They just say, go ahead and knock it down. It's old. The wonderful thing about advocacy is it makes that connection between an imminent threat and the emotional connection to a special place. So that you go from one yard sign to many, many yard signs when something is threatened. So an advocacy campaign can be just what is needed to mobilize many, many people to action. So even though it's often overlooked, it's a very effective outreach strategy that can have long-term benefits. This is one of my favorite ones right here. This building is in central Massachusetts, and it was going to be torn down until a group of high school students got out there, started holding signs, and they got into the local newspaper. They got into the Boston News, and they were actually able to get some money by town meeting, devoted some money to actually saving this building. And it was only because a group of high school students got out there and advocated for saving this building in town. 3, working with your political leaders. All right, I gotta make sure I don't swear on this one. These are quotes that I've heard. When it comes to historic preservation in this city, the city council doesn't give an expletive. The mayor doesn't give an expletive. And my response on the phone was, why should they? Why should they care? I asked a couple questions here. Has the mayor had 10 resident constituent calls in the past 6 months about a preservation concern? Have you presented the economic benefits of historic preservation at a city council meeting? Do you prepare an annual report for city council that explains your preservation accomplishments? The answer to those were no. So anybody been to Lowell? Think about Lowell, the Renaissance of Lowell. There's one name that really stands out, and that is Senator Paul Tsongas. So he was really responsible for the whole turnaround of the city of Lowell and creating the National Historic Park here. But when he was a Lowell city councilor in 1969, and Lowell was really, really going downhill fast, Paul Tsongas, as a city councilor, thought the best thing for Lowell was more parking. So let's fill in all the canals, and that way we can have more parking, and that'll save downtown Lowell. Well, that was his view as a local elected official. There was other people in the city that took him aside and said, Paul, there's a better vision of Lowell. What makes Lowell a special place is the mill buildings and the canals together. That's going to be our future somehow. He took that and ran with it. But it was only because other people in town talked to him as a local elected official, and they had the vision that he was then able to implement. So you've got to be actively engaged with everyone in City Hall, whether it's commissions and boards, local elected officials, your building inspector, definitely. Because when it comes to politics, unfortunately, there's no free pass for preservationists. You got to be part of the political system. Here's another conversation I had. This is when a building was threatened with demolition. Could you get 20 people to show up at a city council meeting to advocate for saving this building? No, I wouldn't be able to get that many people there. What's the population of your city? 90,000 people. So you wouldn't be able to get just 0.02% of the residents of your city to show up at a council meeting? My gentle response after that was, why is it surprising that the city council isn't listening to you? This is entirely logical. It is exactly what we would expect if you don't have a local preservation constituency. So when you're working with your political leaders, you've really got to build up your grassroots constituency first, and then go meet with your elected officials after that. Because the future is determined by those who show up at City Hall. 4, improving your relationships in your community. We have no respect in this town. It's like the residents don't even know we exist until someone complains about us. The hysterical committee is out of control. What have you been called lately? I'm going to check the chat later, but just curious what you've been called lately. Maybe some of these names right here. So important to really think about how you increase your decision-making transparency as a commission. So design guidelines being one of them, but lots of other things that you can do in terms of, if you're a district commission, that you really make it clear what your process is for how you go about deciding what kinds of things are approved within your local historic districts. Part of that is the public hearings as well, how important it is to hold your public hearings and recognize that public hearings are the lasting impression of how historic preservation will be viewed in your community. And messing up on your public hearings, treating anyone poorly at a public hearing can really have long-lasting, multi-year implications for your preservation program. All right, does anybody know why we're called the Hysterical Committee? We are called the Hysterical Committee because we laugh, have a great sense of humor, and have an all-around spectacular outlook on life. That is why we are called the Hysterical Committee. Number 5, building a broader and better organized constituency. I heard a presentation recently where somebody talked about their low-income neighborhood outside of downtown. And he said, I looked at the map of all the historic districts and landmarks in the city, and I realized my historic neighborhood is under the citywide historic district map legend. So I think how do you think that person made that person feel in terms of feeling included? In Los Angeles, wow, some pretty amazing statistics here. Even the National Register, quite the amazing statistic there as well in terms of what the representation is on the National Register. So thinking about your own community in terms of what groups, neighborhoods, or historic resources have been overlooked or neglected during your designation efforts. What some cities have been doing lately is doing an equity audit. So they're really looking at those statistics there. The Miami-Dade area did one recently and found that even though the Miami-Dade area is 70% Hispanic or Latino, 1% of the designations were associated with these communities. Crazy. This is where we talk a little bit about the better organized part here, the better organized constituency, where our commission only has 7 members. What can we accomplish on our own? Yeah, not that much. You're really limited what you can do as a heritage commission or a district commission. So yeah, it's true, you can't do it alone. Because the local preservation commissions, the district commissions, they hold the public hearings. They're not exactly fun. And so where is the fun in historic preservation? It's over there at the local nonprofit historic preservation advocacy organization. The district commissions hold the public hearings and they hold the wine and cheese parties. And that actually works pretty well that way. So having a local nonprofit advocacy organization, a really good partner in your local community, so that it's not just the district commission or the heritage commission trying to do all of the engagement, education activities. Proactive historic preservation planning. The developers always complain about us and say, why is it that historic preservationists always show up late to the table and try to stop everything? How important it is that you are part of the plan for your future. This is often, if it's a master plan, a comprehensive plan, important it is to be part of that, to have a seat at the table there, so that you're actually working with developers on updating zoning ordinances, so that you can actually have regulations that encourage the kinds of development that you really do want. If you are lucky enough to be able to be working on a local preservation plan, these as well, really a great opportunity, whether it's a big plan or a smaller plan, chance to prioritize what can be realistically accomplished, to bring in all those preservation partners and stakeholders as well. Right. 7, strategically communicating the benefits of historic preservation. When I was teaching at the University of Massachusetts and working with my students, I always like to ask them this question. How would you respond to a question like this? You're in the grocery store, in the vegetable aisle, and somebody comes at you and says, I love my historic house. I call myself a preservationist. I've invested over $100,000 restoring it. I still don't want anyone telling me what I can do with my property. Oh, how do you respond to that one? Or maybe one like this. Or maybe one like this. As a parent of 2 kids, I'm well aware that we don't have enough soccer fields in this town. Why save this building when we have more important things to be concerned about? Might get ones like this from your local elected officials. It really comes down to just thinking about tax revenue. Nice, simple black and white thought there. How do you strategically communicate the benefits of preservation? You've probably heard of the elevator speech. Have you heard of the escalator speech? That's where you got 2 minutes, 2 seconds, 2 seconds. That's it. You got 2-second targeted response. And this is where you really want to know your everyone in your community really well. This is where you have good understanding what's on people's minds. And so when somebody goes up that escalator and you're going down and they yelled out, why would you ever want to save that building? And you can yell out something like, for the children, because we want to have more tax revenue, because we want better jobs in town. You yell out something so targeted because you have a good understanding through all of your outreach activities, what's on that person's mind, what drives them. Anybody seen this billboard here? Investing in historic preservation pays big dividends, jobs, tourism, economic development. No, haven't seen that billboard. I haven't either. I made the whole thing up. But it could be real. It could be a real billboard. If anybody's watched the YouTube channel called Strong Towns, this is a really interesting one just in terms of the different way of looking at historic resources, where they compare 2 different development patterns. This turn of the century storefront area here, and one this suburban type of development, which both take up the same amount of space. And yet that much older storefront collection there generates way more municipal tax revenue. And so those are the kinds of numbers that really can drive a lot of people to recognize the value of historic preservation, even if it isn't necessarily so obvious, because we would definitely think, well, the new restaurant there has got to be generating a lot more tax revenue. It's not necessarily the case. So I like to think historic preservation offers something for everyone. All these things here. And while historic preservation may not be the solution for any of these things, I would say it is a part of the solution to all of these things right here. Communicating democracy. More quotes I've heard over the years. This one was at a public meeting. This is un-American. My grandfather didn't fight overseas to come home and be told what he could do with his own home. You might hear one like that. You might also hear one like this, though. I thought you were the Historic District Commission. Why are you letting them tear that building down? Surely at the state level, you have the power to prevent this demolition from happening, right? Here's one that I've heard. Actually, historic resources are best protected at the local level, not the state level. Well, I guess I was just hoping if I called the state office, a knight in shining armor could come and save this building. And I had to give them the bad news. I'm sorry, there's no preservation prince. I can give you some guidance, but it's up to you to work within the local democratic process to save this significant building. It's like, the reality is, when it comes to protecting historic resources through an ordinance, it is local democracy that decides. And that's based on the Constitution, the U.S. Supreme Court, the state constitution, and state law. Preservation ordinances are democracy at work. And so can you speak comfortably about how a preservation ordinance fits into the framework of federal, state, and local law? So when somebody says to you, oh, this local historic district ordinance is unconstitutional, are you able to respond back and explain why that's not the case, why it's not the case at all? Really comes down to this right here, a really important court case for all of you to know is Penn Central Transportation versus the City of New York, 78. And this is a court case that is regularly discussed many, many years later, where the Supreme Court basically said, yes, preservation is a permissible goal of local government. So there was no question that local historic district ordinances and local landmarks are clearly allowed, and that is all by the Supreme Court right there. This language right here from the U.S. Constitution, promoting the general welfare, a lot of what we do as local historic district ordinances stems from this right here, because protecting historic resources actually protects general welfare. So lots more we could talk about on that. But idea is that's the part about the democratic process, and that no, ordinances are definitely constitutional. Number 9, loving our local democratic process. Anybody ever feel this way? Why don't they support us? We are on the side of angels. As a preservationist, do you think that you are on the side of angels? I don't know the answer to that because I don't have inside knowledge on whether you are on the side of angels or not. But I do know this. As soon as we preservationists think that we are on the side of angels, we've put ourselves at an automatic disadvantage. This wonderful book right here, terrific book, Politics of Historic Districts. Lots of great quotes in it. It's one of my favorites. Having the courage of your convictions doesn't mean acting in divine disregard of present realities. We have to deal with our realities. And that leads us to number 10, accepting realities. So here's some more quotes I've heard over the years. Serving on the Historic District Commission has been a most unrewarding post. I resigned from the Preservation Commission because I wasn't getting the support and respect I deserve. All right, well, a few things to think about here for all of us. For all of us involved in local government, doing the hard work of historic preservation, it's not easy work. Make sure that you take care of yourself along the way. Recognize that you can't do everything, accept realities, but keep going with that outreach, keep going with that community engagement aspect of this. Even if you don't have a local historic district ordinance, even if you have challenges with your local historic district ordinance, stick with all those other kinds of things as well. Do all those wonderful things for outreach, engagement, and yeah, if you can't do great things, keep doing those small things in a great way. So yeah, there's just some words that we need to learn to like over time. That it's a process. It's a process. So think of community engagement, outreach, that broad range of things that you can do, all those other aspects of running a local historic preservation program, and you're going to feel much better about it instead of just kind of focusing on not having an ordinance or something like that. So if you don't have an ordinance, remember that democracy is a beautiful thing. We're still going to be recognizing that even if your community has not supported a historic district ordinance through your local democratic process, democracy is still a beautiful thing, and we need to still stick with all those other aspects that we can do in terms of outreach. Okay, so I'm going to finish up on the last part here. Planning and implementing preservation outreach. So I mentioned this one pager that I'm going to get out to you somehow. This is a great place to start just in terms of thinking about what kind of outreach programs might work for your community. Just an awful lot of possibilities for what works, but you've really got to tailor it to your own community for what's going to work the best. In terms of deciding what's best for your outreach program, ideally, you do this as part of preparing a historic preservation plan, because a preservation plan gives you all of those public meetings, all of those outreach meetings, neighborhood meetings, all those things like that will really give you a good sense of where your community is at and what kinds of projects would be most useful for you in terms of being effective in your outreach program. So, not necessarily realistic to be thinking about a preservation plan just for all communities. So it might be other things to think about instead. So maybe you want to just think about some sort of strategic community outreach plan. Maybe it's holding some special meetings. Maybe it's trying to do an opinion survey of some kind. Just doing something that sort of gives you a sense strategically what kinds of outreach programs might work best in your community. Okay, so some takeaways for today. I will leave you with, before we have time for a few questions, that outreach is often overlooked. However, to be successful, every local preservation program needs extensive outreach activities. Take the time to decide what methods of outreach are best for your community. Make outreach part of community preservation planning so that this is really part of the activities of your Heritage Commission, Historic District Commission. And then 3, outreach strategies can give voices to everyone, especially those communities that have been overlooked and neglected in previous historic preservation efforts. All right, I'm going to go back and look at the chat here. Andrew's going to help me if there's any questions that come up. Please tell us about the building in your childhood backyard. Okay, yeah, I could do that one. All right, while you're thinking of any questions, so that building was actually called the Wesson Mansion, and it was Smith and Wesson family. So the story goes, I don't know if this is myth or not, but the story goes that instead of building a mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, or wherever, he built his mansion in central Massachusetts because his wife grew up there. And his mother-in-law told him, "You're not going to amount to nothing." And so when he made all of his money in gun manufacturing, he's like, "I know where I'll build my mansion, up on a hill across the street from my mother-in-law." And so that was the summer estate of Daniel Wesson, of Smith and Wesson. And yes, you can get a copy of the slide deck. I'm assuming Andrew has all of your email addresses, and you'll get a copy of this as a PDF later.
Yeah, so we'll do the slide deck and that one pager of outreach suggestions. We have that to send to everyone.
All right. Anybody else have some other questions that they'd like to ask?
Chris, I have a question.
All right.
I think I'm not in the same boat, but I wonder if when do you know, either from personal experience or from your experience around the state, when you're the problem? You know, like when you should step down or let other people take over?
Yeah, I had to cut out a few slides, but I actually do talk about that in a different presentation, where I talk about sometimes the most passionate people, the most passionate preservationists aren't necessarily the best people to have as the spokesperson in the community. So, well, while it's you really want to be able to have maybe the passionate preservationists, the historians, part of the whole group in terms of your community engagement or heritage commission. You really want somebody that can speak calmly and have a sense of empathy, maybe in terms of what other people are experiencing. Just a really good listener. I often find preservationists aren't the best listeners, and that's just because we're passionate and a building's threatened, and we gotta save this building. So I'm not, I guess I'll show you this slide right here. If you aren't a member of the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, this is a great organization, and this is a great guide for how to do messaging, just how to speak with people, how to have really specifics in terms of getting a message out that's not going to really turn people off. And I think, Andrew, that's kind of what you're getting at sometimes, is that sometimes the people that have served a long time as a chairperson maybe are doing things that are actually maybe at a public hearing, really kind of doing some real problems in terms of running a good positive preservation program. All right, got another chat here. Yeah, how to encourage more people to join your commission. Getting enough volunteers is always hard. Yeah, I think doing a lot of those activities where you're just getting people together and there's that's all that's happening, whether it's the wine and cheese party or whether it's the researcher home day. Some commissions or nonprofit organizations will have a day where they just put out all the old maps and all the old documents that they have about the history of the neighborhoods, and you can come in and learn about your house and maybe do some research that way. I think there's lots of events that can take place that can really bring a lot of people in, and I think you're going to have to have a bigger volunteer pool. The more events and the more numbers you have for events where lots of people are coming to them. The other kind of thing I think to encourage new people to join your commission is coming up with a work program for what you're going to accomplish. I've sat through lots and lots of local commission meetings, and sometimes they're not particularly productive. And that's a good way to turn people off from wanting to join or remaining on the commission. So if you once a year as a heritage commission, as a district commission, actually put together a work plan, here's what we are going to accomplish over the next year. That puts everyone kind of together to say, this is what we're going to work on, and it's going to be easier to draw people in when they can see, oh yeah, here's the goal, here's what we're going to accomplish, and I can really be part of that.
I wonder too, some of our local historic district commissions only, regulate 3 buildings, 4 buildings. There's not a lot that they do, and I think sometimes people if they're going to be on a committee, they want to be either busy or feel like they're doing something. And then you also don't have a very big pool of people to choose from, because someone from the other side of town might not feel compelled enough to join a commission that oversees 2 buildings on the other side of town. Chris, I have a question that came into me directly that says, do you have any suggestions for how limited numbers of commission members might be butting heads? So there's not a big pool of people, but maybe those who are all on the commission agree they all have the same goal, but don't get along.
Yeah. We got 2 minutes here left. Oh, I think one is just, is there enough listening? Is everyone getting their voice? Is everyone getting their voice heard around the table is really important. And if that's not happening and the chairperson's not able to pull that together, is there somebody else that can come in and facilitate a meeting so that all the voices of the commission members are being heard? Every commission is going to have some differences of opinion. But at the end, it's just trying to recognize that there is one mission, there is at least one work plan or something that we're all focused on trying to implement.
There's a new question that came in about a brief summary of economic impact for historic preservation. Is there a good resource that we could include with our mailing?
A brief one. So there's been a number of states that have done economic impacts for their local historic districts. I don't know if I have it all on one page, but I'll take a look and see what I can find.
My experience is that they've been tailored to, specific cities and states that and usually more urban places. I think Portland, Maine just went through this. So it might be, maybe the bigger messages are there, but it might not convince a select board in a town of 1,000 people.
Yep.
And we'll check with DHR. I know Amy and Brandy are on this call, so we could ask them.
Okay.
All right. It's 1:01. Any other questions out there? Okay. Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking your time to present to us. We'll follow up with an email to everyone with those promised handouts. And just a plug that we're planning a few other presentations in the new year. One on neighborhood heritage districts, which is kind of a newer planning model that doesn't have the same regulatory authority as a historic district commission, but has more kind of design input than just a regular zoning district. And then we're also going to be talking about septic systems and challenging septic systems for historic buildings on small lots or in rural villages. So that should be exciting. So stay tuned. If you're not subscribing to our email list, please do, so that you can stay apprised of these upcoming presentations. But thank you all. Thank you, Chris, again. And
great to be here.